The House passes a bill to stop discrimination against LGBTQ people. But will it really stop discrimination? And what could go wrong? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Matt Gnezda, filling in for Chris Chappell. Be sure to subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell on. That way you can receive that satisfying ding when a new episode comes out. So, let's talk about sex. No, not that kind of sex. This kind of sex. Or, depending on who you ask, it might be more like this. Or like this. You know what? That's where I draw the line. I refuse to share a bathroom with Tinkerbell. She leaves fairy dust everywhere. And Grumpy Cat never flushes. And how do mermaids go to the bathroom anyway? Never mind, I don't want to know. But the point is, the term sex means a lot of different things to a lot of different people these days. It's become a bit controversial, and that controversy has just entered the Senate. You see, sex-based discrimination has been illegal, according to federal law, for more than 50 years. After all, sex is one of the protected classes in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That law prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. But on March 7th, sex, as a legal term, received a makeover from the House of Representatives when they passed H.R. 5, otherwise known as the Equality Act. The Equality Act does a number of things. It amends the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and a handful of other anti-discrimination acts. It specifies that sex, as a protected class, now includes sexual orientation and gender identity. It also expands existing protections against discrimination generally, so now it also includes housing, credit, education, federally funded programs, and jury service. Wait, jury service? Does anyone really feel discriminated against when they're excused from jury duty? And finally, it furthers protections for employment and more explicitly defines public accommodations. No, not that kind of public accommodations. Didn't we already do a toilet joke? Don't look at me. We just hired a new writer. Public accommodations are actually defined as any establishment that provides goods, services, or programs to the public. So, like stores and gas stations and stuff. The Equality Act was first introduced in the 114th Congress in 2015. It finally passed the House in 2019, but was never voted on by the Senate. Plus, President Trump indicated that he would veto it anyway. A White House official said at the time that the Trump administration opposes discrimination and supports equal treatment for all, but that the Equality Act was filled with poison pills that threatened to undermine parental and conscience rights. We'll come back to the various objections to the bill in a minute. First, let's look at what supporters have to say about the bill. Proponents say that it's a long overdue landmark legislation that would expand federal civil rights law to prohibit LGBTQ and gender identity discrimination. It isn't quite as relevant as it was before the Supreme Court's decision in Bostock v. Clayton County, which happened in 2020. The Supreme Court basically stated that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 already covers employment discrimination based on sexual orientation or transgender status. So that would make an additional law about that unnecessary. But proponents of the Equality Act note that it covers a lot more than just employment discrimination. The bill itself begins with a list of findings regarding discrimination in a variety of areas against LGBTQ people or people who are perceived to be LGBTQ. Supporters have a straightforward argument. It's called the Equality Act because it ensures equal treatment under the law for everyone. However, opponents of the act say that's not the case. I'll explain after the break. Welcome back. Many opponents of the Equality Act actually like the idea of protecting LGBTQ folks against discrimination, but they have concerns about the way the Equality Act goes about it. One major concern is about religious freedom. The Equality Act explicitly states that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993, or RFRA, shall not provide a basis for challenging the application or enforcement of a covered title. In other words, that 1993 law does allow individuals to go to court if they feel that a government action is overly impacting their ability to freely exercise their religion. And if it goes to court, the government must show that its action burdening the person's religious exercise is the least restrictive means of furthering a compelling government interest. But the new Equality Act says that the 1993 law doesn't apply to civil rights legislation. And that means people can no longer go to court to challenge it on religious freedom grounds. So opponents of the Equality Act argue that this clause denies them their right to assert their religious freedom in court, that it takes away their rights. Previous versions of the Equality Act actually included some language protecting religious freedom, but the current version that passed in the House not only removed that language, it also added the RFRA denial clause. Another objection to the Equality Act has to do with how it would affect women's sports teams. Many opponents argue that the way the Equality Act defines sex would mandate allowing any athlete who identifies as a woman or transgender woman to join women's-only sports teams across the United States. These people argue that transgendered athletes on women's teams have an inherent unfair biological advantage over biological females. Some also object to the idea of letting biological males enter women's restrooms, locker rooms, and protective facilities such as battered women's shelters. Others worry that the Equality Act would result in fines for misgendering, mandates on how schools define sex, and government oppression of religious colleges and universities. As might be expected given the topic, some of the opponents have religious reasons for their objections. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene says the Equality Act that we are to vote on this week destroys God's creation. To be fair, she went on to say it can be handled completely different to stop discrimination without destroying women's rights, little girls' rights in sports, and religious freedom. But supporters of the Equality Act in Congress call many of these objections red herrings, that is, misleading arguments. They say that laws trying to achieve similar things on the state level haven't had the results opponents fear, and that every time advances have been made for LGBTQ individuals, opponents have predicted slippery slope disasters that never came. As Democratic Congresswoman Marie Newman said, "I encourage all of you to not weaponize religion and not weaponize red herrings about sports." But are the objections actually red herrings? Looking at the language in the bill itself, some of the statements about what will, would, or may happen if the bill passed seem a little far-fetched. But others have already been happening. In Connecticut and other places, trans girls are allowed to join high school female sports teams. They're disproportionately winning competitions and shaking up sports. And it's hard not to wonder about the purpose of the clause about the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Of course, this is 21st century America, where politics are deeply divided. To pass the Equality Act in the Senate will require compromise. And very few people seem ready to compromise. And the speakers for both sides often seem to be talking past one another. On one side, there's a lot of name-calling. Mean, despicable, dangerous, transphobic, fake feminists. On the other side, you get statements like this. Now, with society becoming increasingly unmoored from its moral heritage, it brings on mass confusion and social psychological dysphoria, which weakens society and even erodes the underpinnings of civilized behavior. Well, I guess we know where we're headed. But a lot of that talking past each other comes from different definitions of words, like sex. For example, when asked about the undeniable and overwhelming success of transgender girls with XY levels of testosterone on sports teams in Connecticut, Eliza Byard from an LGBT student advocate group said, "But they are girls. They are girls. Men don't compete in women's sports." So a lot of this hinges on what exactly it means to be a girl. The very definition of terms like women, men, girls, and boys has become a political battleground. And ultimately, that is the biggest concern many people have with the Equality Act. Broad language and definitions. For example, it defines gender identity as the gender-related identity, appearance, mannerisms, or other gender-related characteristics of an individual, regardless of the individual's designated sex at birth. It also implicitly defines gender identity as an aspect of sex. When language itself is the source of conflict, well, welcome to modern politics. Only one thing is certain. President Biden has made passing the Equality Act part of his 100-day agenda. But, like a lot of other bills coming out of the House right now, the Equality Act is going to struggle in the Senate. So, what do you think about the Equality Act? Is it protecting the rights of one group by infringing on the rights of others? Will the Senate be able to agree on definitions enough to find compromise? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Once again, I'm Matt Ganejda. Chris will be back on Saturday. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.